Hey everybody. It occurred to me a while ago that there are a lot of questions about 3D characters and how those are approached and how they're developed and then how they're designed and how they're actually implemented. And a lot of people get lost in the tech. They get lost in what setup they're going to use, what rig they're going to use, how they're going to use motion capture, whether they're going to animate, etc., etc., etc. And it occurred to me that I thought I should share the way I approach setup for characters, because there are two really significant pieces for getting a character to look really good. The first part is proportion. You'd think it was a simple thing, and they teach it in life drawing, but proportion is still the measure between something that just doesn't look right and something that's spot on. So the next thing that's not obvious is when you put a skeleton in a volumetric geometry, when you place a joint in the center of a skin or a geometry. It's similar to looking at the way a joint is oriented inside of a CT scan. And the perception that a lot of the application manufacturers want to continue is that if you just place the joints arbitrarily in space, eyeballing the geometry, that'll be a good skeleton, that'll be a skeleton that moves the geometry. And as it turns out, as you get way farther into the process, you realize that the skeleton needed to be at a different location in the geometry, or the geometry needed to be modified, or the skeleton needed to be modified, or the weighting needed to be modified, or blend shape needed to be modified, or all of those things needed to be changed. And those changes in characters, because they're the intersection of a lot of different technologies and a lot of different specialties, tends to be very expensive. So when you look at how do I approach proportion and how do I approach positioning the skeleton in the geometry, I thought, well, I should share that. So that's what this video is about. Additionally, the audience is professional animators, professional 3D or character design artists, people who need to get something done to get paid, and so the techniques that are the most effective, and that they're application independent. It doesn't matter which program you're using, it doesn't matter which version of which plugin you downloaded, it doesn't matter. So these techniques have worked for years and years, and as far as the sketching and doing circles and then building an outline, those techniques predate me by centuries. So I'm going to show those really quick and see if this will help. Okay, starting with the sketch approach, we build construction lines and then circles, and then add shading to show contour. In a character sketch example, we start with the head or number of heads high, and then do construction lines, and then add circles to show volume, and then finally shading. Okay, so let's get started in a 3D package and just import an image as a reference image, and on top of that image I'm going to just select circles. These are NURB circles, and just place them over the image to give me a sort of shape reference. So it's very similar to the life drawing approach, but now I'm doing it sort of 2D for 3D. So I'm making circles for the head, and then the middle torso, and now the upper torso with the shoulders. And then if I adjust these or turn off the image reference, I can then see just the circles and start to get an idea of proportion for my character. Obviously, this approach is ancient, since there are lots of life drawing images and proportion, and these are different, shows different head ratios for different proportions, and then other examples. They're very, very common. You can find them everywhere. After doing this for several years, I've put together my own specialized character tool set that uses the same approach, but there's some programmatic information in where the ratios need to be. Here is my custom tool that I call Replicant, And this takes just the height information. I'm just adjusting the height information, and then does all of the skeletal and character ratios. This is adjusting the head ratio. So 2 head lengths would be an infant. This is about 5 head lengths, or actually 6 head lengths, and this is sort of an adolescent. And then, but let's work on an adult. So this is 8 head ratio, or 8 heads high, and then I can change the parameters inside of that. So head width or foot size, and you notice that changes the hip width and the leg length. Then if I want to change other parameters, I can change the shoulder width. I can change the torso position, which changes the neck length and leg length. This is just playing with the shoulder width again. But we want to get to setting up a skeleton, so let's just stay with the pretty standard character here, and we'll just deal with your average guy at this point. So I've got the head ratio and the shoulder ratio and the hip ratio and the torso length, and what I make is marker positions that give me basically point locations, a curve for the back, and then points where all the joints are going to be, including all the finger joints. The next thing to do is take into account what the 0 position for the skeleton is going to be. I place those joint proportions, and then in the pose I want to be the 0 pose, and then I create a skeleton, or I make skeleton joints that then snap to those target positions. So this has a lot of this has all the backbones in the back, but now I can rotate the joints into the pose that matches the sketch, and now I've got a pretty close one-to-one match of the skeleton to the original drawing. So you can see where the shoulder position is, the head and hip ratio, the knees, the ankle positions. These line up pretty good from the front and from the side. Alright, so let's delete that skeleton and bring back our target ratios, and we'll just leave them the same size because we liked those ratios. And then let's make a new set of reference curves, and then set those to the 0 pose we wanted to use, and then make a new skeleton but with less joints in the backbone. So now we have all the same proportions, but we only want to use 4 for our example. Alright, now that we have a reduced skeleton, I use another toy I wrote called Skin Job to create nerve spheres that are parented to the skeleton. And this lets us look at a volumetric representation of what the character is going to look like. And so now we can see where the spheres just interpenetrate. These are just what I call a blob model, parented to the skeleton. But because it is, I can grab the skeleton, rotate the joints, and I can look at what basically what deformations would be before there's a skin. So this is not a final modeling technique. This is still just reference. I want to know where the outer edge of the skin is going to be relative to where the joint rotation is, to see what the shape deformation will do to my character. If we take a closer look at just the upper torso or the shoulder, which is typically a really complicated problem for where the skeleton meets the skin, and people will look at the motion and often misinterpret this. They'll say, oh, well, the skinning needs to be changed, or the weighting needs to be changed, or the animation needs to be changed. And really what it is the joints and their relative position to the skin need to be changed. So again, what I'm saying is, if you spend this time to do this intermediate step, you can take an informed look or a shaded look at whether or not the skin surface position is the right size relative to your skeleton position. And so you can rotate any of these joints, including like, let's rotate the torso or upper torso a little bit here. And you can look at what what the effect is. If you change the rotation angle just a little bit, what the backbone would do. Is the upper torso volume sticking out? Right now I've got a little bit of shoulder is sticking out too much, so the blob should be moved up. Or the torso can be shortened. And there are any number of variations that can be done here because I've only invested a couple of minutes in this. I haven't spent a lot of time to make something finished because I'm still in the design phase. So let's talk about that. If we're in the design phase and we just destroy that character and we want to change to something much more massive, so let's make it a lot taller, like more like 12 feet tall, and let's change some of the proportions a little bit, but make the same reference markers and then the exact same skeleton with the same number of joints. And then let's use skin job. Get this in the right pose first. And then make the same blob model or in the new proportions. So now we have something much, much larger that still works exactly the same as the example before. Well, this doesn't have complete fingers, of course, but this is just a simple sketch representation. So we have proportions creating a skeleton. We use those curves to size up our overall mass, our overall size, and then just by parenting some spheres to the skeleton, we can get an idea of what we're dealing with, and just not just for doing character design, but you can start working on poses like this, where I've got a couple of stored poses for different, comic book poses. So this isn't really animation. This is just stepping through different poses and seeing if our geometry holds up. But at the same time, we can export this or take a snapshot and then draw right over the top of it and produce reference art or sketch art. And so what that lets us do in combination is you can make concept art from these simple representations, so you can get feedback from your director, your art director, your character lead, your character director, and get some interactive feedback for size and shape and feel before committing an enormous amount to a hierarchy that has to be completely redone and is extraordinarily expensive downstream if everything has to be done over. So this is just playing with some of the shoulder and arm rotations for the skeleton to see if the interpenetration is still working, and that works pretty good. Well, that's all the time we have today. Hopefully that helps, and if there are questions or thoughts, feel free to leave them in the comments. We'll see if we can get to that. There are a lot of different specialties and things in upcoming videos and that I'll be talking about. Effects, facial animation, geometry, scene layup, all of those things we're going to be covering in this channel. So until then, see you next time, and remember the Graphics Commando motto: get it done.